And welcome, Raise Your Inner Game today. I'm David Levin. This is our Friday episode, so we're talking about the inner game of life. Tuesdays are for the mental game of sports and competition. Fridays are for the rest of our lives. So how are you feeling this week? Hope you're doing well. Hope things are going well for you. I am getting a little better, I'm happy to say. My cold is on the mend, slowly getting back to my normal rhythms. That's a nice relief. Also having an amazing warm weather spell. It hit 50 degrees yesterday, and I went for a ride on my beautiful new scooter, and it was fantastic. It actually feels like March, which is a great gift, but also just destined to break our hearts, right? Because, of course, we have a lot of winter weather still ahead. But I'll take it for now and deal with the winter blahs when they come. So lots to talk about this week. The terrible air crash in D.C., Trump's flurry of executive orders, a great fun batch of crazy, craven, and dumb actions from the White House and the Republicans and their minions. The critical need for self-mastery in these times. How to keep the news from driving you crazy. Our challenge of the week. A new season of a favorite show on Netflix. And the craziest guitar you have ever seen. All right, we'll start with ups and downs. So what gave me a lift this week and what things were pulling me down? The first up I mentioned is having my cold get better. It's interesting. It's not really a lift so much as reduced gravity. You know what I mean? The cold is weighing me down. As it goes away, I feel lighter and stronger and happier and more positive and optimistic. It's a pretty big difference, and it all happens automatically. That's nice. But it's also a pretty good observation about managing your inner game. The more you can remove things from your life that pull you down, the better you'll feel in all kinds of ways. Anyway, nice to be feeling healthier again. Not 100% there, but getting closer. Another up was playing Scrabble with my family. Peter's back at school now, but last week, the last night before he left, we all sat down and played Scrabble one night. It was really fun. Funny too, Frances, our 16-year-old, said it was the first time she'd ever played, which just doesn't seem possible. But anyway, that was really fun. I think I came in last, maybe second to last. Doesn't matter, right? That's fine. It's a fun game on its own. I'm also reminded how great it is to play games with people you're close to. It's just good in every way. It's fun. It's a fresh energy. It makes you feel more connected to each other. One of my favorite memories of Margaret parents, they both passed now, but early in our relationship, we go to their house and play cards with them now and then. And it was just the greatest thing to be with them in a different way like that, to see them in a playful mode rather than parent mode. Anyway, Scrabble night, super fun, lovely. The last up for me is I'm officially back in songwriter mode again. I mentioned a while ago I dug up some old songs of mine from back in the 80s, embarrassed by most of them, but some still had some good, bits going on in there. So I started to work on a couple of those, and it's pretty fun. Though, to be honest, fun is maybe not the best word for it. It does make me happy. At some level, there's a feeling of aliveness to it and sort of a connection to my essential self, if that makes sense. This is what I did for most of my younger life. So it really feels like who I am in a way, like it's a good thing to do, but also sort of not at the same time. When you hear the word creative, you tend to think of a certain kind of energy, maybe playful, maybe a little weird, fresh, energetic, I guess sort of like kids at play. But the act of creating for me is not like that at all. It's actually quite burdened. It's like there's this load on you. You're trying to solve this problem. It feels super important, though, of course, it's not really super important. And it's in your mind all the time. And I mean all the time. It takes over every extra bit of extra bandwidth you have, extra bit of extra bandwidth. Going to bed is the last thing I think about before I go to sleep, which keeps me up a little bit. During the day, every time I get even a moment between other things, I bring it up again in my mind. And you do that because that's what it takes to do the work. To work on the piece and come up with new ideas, you have to be completely inside what you already have. It's like the song is a little house in your mind and you're decorating it, working on one room at a time. You have to be inside the house to see what's working and to come up with new ideas that fit with what you already have. And so every chance you get, you're pulling yourself back into that house to do a little more work. It's exhausting. It's distracting, frequently frustrating. You think you got something great. You come back, maybe not great, maybe terrible even. You wonder if the whole thing even makes sense, if it's worth it. I mean, at this point, it's purely a hobby, right? Are we sure it's a good thing? Anyway, being back in songwriting mode is actually an up and down for this week. I'm happy to be doing it, but it's also a bit of a load. We'll see how it goes. All right, next up, top stories. The big story this week, as of this writing, because things do move pretty quickly, is the plane crash in D.C. It's such a horrible thing to think about, the shock for those families, their loved ones just being gone like that. Not a lot to say about this for me. Too soon to know exactly what happened. Obviously, a communication breakdown of some kind. I saw something this morning from a pilot who flies that route. And I'm a licensed pilot myself, though I haven't flown for years. But I do understand these things a little bit. But he was speculating that based on the tower communications, it sounds like the helicopter pilot may have been tracking the wrong plane. The tower asked a couple of times, do you have a visual on the plane? Which indicates that the path the helicopter was on was giving them some worry, right? But the helicopter pilot said, yes, we have it. So they continued on, and then came the crash. So it really does sound like they were tracking the wrong plane. It was just a miscommunication. It's terrible. Anyway, we'll learn the full story in time. We always do. Accident investigators do a great job, but it does take time. I will say this points to how wrong-headed so much of Trump's early actions are. One thing he did, a smaller item that got very little attention, was to dismantle the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. Does that not sound like a bad idea now? Not to blame that on this crash, of course, just general the concept behind it. This is a nonpartisan group that oversees the things that have made our aviation system incredibly safe. This is the first fatal crash we've had in our country in something like 13 years. I remember when I was a kid, it was not that rare to hear about a plane crash, but they've almost completely disappeared. And it hasn't happened because we're lucky. It's happened because people in government, manufacturers, experts, civil servants, have created and managed this remarkable system. Is there room for reform? Could be, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure making it weaker and more political is not the way to make it better. And if they're so clearly wrong-headed on this, it's safe to assume they are just as wrong about pretty much everything else. No surprise there, of course, but a good reminder. Also, he is bound to make the worst possible comments about it and make everything worse than it needs to be. Keep an eye out for that. He really is about the worst possible leader you could imagine. The opposite instincts of what you want, which is to bring people together and comfort people and give them, confidence about things. Anyway, the other big news, speaking of that, is the slew of crazy, awful, dumb things Trump and Republicans have done this past week. Just a few favorites. He has proposed defunding public schools that support trans kids by, for example, calling them by their preferred pronouns. He has proposed making scholarships taxable income, so making college more expensive. To do what? Same as always, cut taxes for rich people. He fired the investigators who worked on his cases. Never mind that he clearly broke the law and they were just doing their job. And the stated reason was that they couldn't be trusted to carry out the president's agenda. The Justice Department is not supposed to carry out the president's agenda. They're supposed to carry out the public's agenda and enforce the laws regardless of politics. Is there any clearer signal of what these guys intend to do than this? By the way, side point reminder, Project 2025, a big majority of these early proposals are right from that program. It was always the plan, and they're just getting started. Trump sent a buyout offer, early retirement, to 2 million federal employees. First of all, he doesn't have the authority to do that. There's no money for it. It's almost certainly a bogus offer that no one should take. He can't be trusted, just at that level, long track record of cheating workers. But beyond that, how are they going to fill these positions? Where are they going to find people to keep the Medicaid site running, for example, and disperse payments to keep our aviation system safe and all the rest. It's just insane and so destructive and wrong-headed and dangerous and callous to people. This next one's especially upsetting to me for some reason, I think because it shows how Trump's evil is starting to spread. Mark Milley, former head of the Joint Chiefs, already mentioned Trump removed his security clearance, putting him in physical danger. Now, Pete Hegseth, newly confirmed defense secretary, God help us, thank you Republicans, senators, has announced an investigation to consider removing one of Milley's stars, lowering his rank, lowering his retirement benefits, bringing shame upon him, his work, his memory, all because he stood up to Trump. This is one of the new secretary's top priorities. First day on the job, stick it to Mark Milley. It's clear retribution and punishment. And where do you suppose that idea came from? It's going to be a long, crazy 4 years. Speaking of crazy, for our Crazy of the Week, two more. First, this is kind of fun. But the White House came out with a lie this week that the U.S. government spent $50 million on condoms for Gaza. You might have heard about this one. If you're wondering, this is not true, and it couldn't be true. There aren't that many people in Gaza. The math just doesn't work, even if we wanted to give everyone a lifetime supply of condoms for some reason. But according to reports, we've actually given 0 condoms to Gaza. So where do they get this? How can they be so crazy? To top it off, Trump himself, doubling down as always, said not only did this happen, but Hamas used the condoms to make bombs. Bombs? What kind of bombs do you make with condoms? Water balloons, maybe? I don't know. Sounds crazy to me. So it turns out the Gaza they were referring to is actually a province in Mozambique, in Africa, not the Middle East. Not sure where they get this anyway. But anyway, Gaza, this area in Mozambique, does get some support from us, though $50 million, still a bit of a stretch. But this just shows so clearly how Trump just makes shit up. He thought it was the Middle East, Gaza, because he's too lazy to check, doesn't care. And then, believing that, riffing on that, he made up the part about Hamas using them for bombs. It has to be made up because they didn't get the condoms, right? He just made it up out of thin air because it sounded good. It served his narrative in some way, God knows how. I don't know if that's officially crazy, but it does seem like a mental defect to me, and not great in the president. The other item, it's only crazy because it's so awful and dumb, but Trump says he'd like to get rid of FEMA, the people who come in and help with natural disasters. He doesn't like that. He thinks states should handle disasters on their own. In what universe does that actually help anybody? For some good news, more excellent pushback. My favorite, again from Denmark, of course they're up in arms about the whole Greenland thing, as they should be. So I saw some pictures of a bakery selling what they call Moron cakes. Moron cakes. They're little puff pastries made up to look like Donald Trump. They're orange, they have frosting for hair, little beady eyes. Pretty hilarious. The only problem for me in that one is that I'm grossed out of the thought of putting little Trumps into my mouth. But someone else posted, don't eat it, just buy it and run it over with your car. I thought that's pretty good thinking. Also, potential pushback. It's a bit of a long shot, but bear with me. So these executive orders Trump's putting out, it's helpful to remember that these generally have no legal authority. If there's a law in place that they're trying to overturn, they have no effect on that. They're just official-sounding suggestions and requests. And there was one case this week, I think it had to do with the funding freeze. He actually can't do that. Congress set spending, and these funds were already approved. So he put out the order. Agencies started shutting things down, created all kinds of chaos. People sued. A federal judge stayed the order, because, again, you can't do that. It's illegal. But then the White House said, go ahead and do it anyway. That is unconstitutional, literally acting in violation of the Constitution. And if the president does it, I can't see how it is not an impeachable offense. I know you're rolling your eyes. Here we go again. But I'm not really kidding. The president's number one requirement, constitutionally, his solemn oath, is to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, end quote. He actually broke that oath twice this week, or at least tried to. His order ending birthright citizenship. That's the 14th Amendment. It's literally in the Constitution. He wants to undo that, and that's fine. You can change that, through a new amendment. Any other path is illegal and unconstitutional. And Congress directing spending is also in the Constitution. So when Trump tells people to go against the Constitution, he is in clear violation of his oath of office. Excuse me. Now, he has immunity, personally, for illegal activity. Thank you, Supreme Court. But if you remember, during his first impeachment, one of Mitch McConnell's main arguments against it was that the president could be held accountable elsewhere, in the courts, once they were out of office. Now that that's no longer an option, there's only one way to hold a president accountable, and that is impeachment. I know it's not going to happen now. Probably no one wants to do it anyway, but mark my words. When we take back the House in 26, this is going to be on the table, and it should be on the table. He thinks he's invincible now. He can get away with anything. He's going to rack up piles of impeachable offenses between now and then as he tries to remake things, to have everything do his bidding. But we are watching and keeping notes, and we'll be ready when the time comes. That's my hope anyway. All right, that's Top Stories. Next up, Inner Game Gold. Last week we talked about the idea that you have thoughts, but you are not your thoughts. This powerful observation that's the absolute cornerstone of raising your inner game. This week I want to revisit the whole idea of the importance of self-mastery in the first place. As I expect you know, I opened the Raise Your Inner Game book with the quote from Leonardo da Vinci: "The height of a man's success is gauged by his self-mastery." And we, of course, update that to the height of a person's success is gauged by their self-mastery. And I opened the book with this because not everyone makes the connection that success, the things we most want in our lives, happiness, pride in our work, in ourselves, connection, strong relationships, all of it comes as the result of self-mastery, of learning to control our thoughts and emotions so we can overcome the inner gravity we all feel and be our best, most present, and productive selves. So I opened the book with it to sort of lay down a marker. Self-mastery is the best and quickest path to the things we most want. And I'm thinking about it this week because I've had a couple of conversations with people who have basically said, I don't know what to do with the news now. It's so upsetting and depressing and never ending. I feel like I should stay engaged, but I also feel like it might be too much. And by the way, I totally get that. I really do. And people should absolutely protect their inner game from as many negative triggers as possible. There's no doubt about that. But I also think we need to stay engaged now. The risks could not be more real, and the only chance of minimizing them comes from each of us standing up and doing our part to resist. So that brings us back to self-mastery. The only way to stay engaged and not lose your mind is to boost your inner game skills so you can expose yourself to the negativity and not let it get you. It's a funny image, but I'm reminded of the old game Operation, if you remember that, where you had to grab these little plastic bones with tweezers, but not touch the sides, or you get shocked, right? The buds would go off. It's sort of like that. We have to dig in to do the work. We have to expose ourselves to the shock, but we also want to keep ourselves safe. So the solution is to be even more advanced in our technique, more professional. No shaking hands, no sloppy movements, no bad angles, just precise surgical skill. That's how we get the job done without getting shocked. So that's the point of hitting this idea of self-mastery again. We have super important work to do to resist a Republican damage machine. The height of our ability to be successful with that will be our levels of self-mastery. So again, I invite you, if you have taken our training or read the book, go through it again. Redouble your self-mastery practice. And if you haven't, now is the time. RaiseYourInnerGame.com for information on all of our training options. All right, that's Inner Game Gold. The height of a person's success is gauged by their self-mastery. Next up, raise your outer game. This week, I want to continue with this idea of how to handle the news, how to stay engaged and not lose your mind. High level, as we just said, raise your inner game. Make sure your mental skills are sharp and up to the task. But that doesn't mean you have to just take in all the news with no limits. That's probably not the best idea. Yes, it does come in constantly, especially under Trump. That's part of his plan to overwhelm us so nothing gets too much traction. You could check your news feed every 10 minutes and likely find something of interest, which is tempting and actually quite addicting, which is part of the problem. But my recommendation, and I'm speaking to myself with this as much as anyone really, I think I need to do some work on this myself, is to set some limits. Letting yourself check in at will is just a recipe for overwhelm and misery. Much better to set some rules for when you can check. Once a day is an option. I ran a test a while ago, set a challenge for myself. No news before 9 p.m. Probably mentioned this before. It was super hard to stick to, but the test was there ever something I needed to know that I missed because I held it off until 9 at night? And the answer was no. And it seems silly to even consider, what could there possibly be that would happen during a given day other than, something right here in town, like a neighbor's house on fire or something, that I couldn't wait to learn about until that night. And of course, it's nothing. Back in the day, I even limited it to once a week. I checked in on Twitter for any big breaking stories, but actually reading about current events one day a week. I think it was Thursday when the week magazine would come in the mail. That gave me a great summary of all the current events. It was all I needed. So much less stressful to read about things after the fact rather than as they happen. Anyway, that is Raise Your Outer Game for this week. Limit your news intake so you can stay engaged and do your part for the resistance, but also keep your sanity and happiness. Next up, our challenge of the week. This week, you guessed it, let's work on this. Come up with a plan for managing your news consumption in a way that helps you stay engaged, but also stay sane. So obviously it means it can't be a total ban, though if that's what you need to do, that's fine too. Maybe take a month or two off. I don't want to force anyone to sacrifice their happiness over this. But assuming you can handle some news, what will work for you? Once a day, once a week, every other day, nothing online, print only, just Blue Sky check-ins. I actually like those a lot, the Blue Sky app, but they are especially addictive, so you want to have some sort of limit on those. I think for me, I will try the no news till 9 plan again. And that would apply to everything. No stories, no Blue Sky posts, nothing all day till 9 p.m. That worked great before. I'm going to give that a try. I'm going to try to give it a try. By the way, I haven't been on Twitter for years, really. And I've never done Facebook or Instagram feeds. Blue Sky is my favorite and only social media app. Definitely recommend that. Also love the Week magazine for print coverage. But see if you can come up with a plan this week. As always, to put it into action, you'll need some daily reminders and a way to track your progress. Also, a little grace, because it's going to be hard. Probably be fun to journal about this too, to make a note of how different it feels, and also, consider tweaking your plan over time. That's another helpful idea too, in general, but specifically for this. This doesn't have to be all or nothing. Think of it as a test. Start with one plan, check in with yourself, make changes as needed. All right, that's our challenge of the week. Next up, highly recommended. Finished Black Widow by Daniel Silva. Excellent, as always. Started a new one from a new author. A little disappointed. It started strong enough. I was reading the sample you can download. That made me want to buy the whole book. But then pretty quickly it declined a bit, so a little worried now about the writing going forward. I'll let you know about that one as I progress. One of my favorite shows on Netflix is starting up its season 2 this week. It's called Mo. It's about a guy who is a Palestinian refugee living in Houston. He'd been waiting on his asylum hearing for 22 years, and it sounds like a joke, but we know that's not a crazy exaggeration, right? Our immigration system is a mess, and it creates situations like this. But it's just a lovely show. It's so helpful for me to get a feel for what life is like for people in different situations, like Muslim families in America, for example. It's not preachy in any way, which is part of what makes it so great. It's just him and his family and friends trying to live their lives. He's very funny. His girlfriend is Mexican and Christian, which brings its own issues, as you can imagine. Anyway, it's a real gem. Mo, Netflix, highly recommended. I also want to mention what might be the craziest instrument I've ever seen. It's called the circle guitar, and you just cannot believe this thing. So picture an electric guitar. There's the body, the neck, the strings go from the bridge on the body to the tuning pegs at the end of the neck. There are some pickups under the strings in the middle of the body, right? So this guitar has a metal ring in the body that runs around the pickups and the bridge, and it spins. And it has little pieces of plastic filament sticking out at various intervals. So as it spins, it's strumming the strings for you in rhythmic patterns. So rather than strumming or picking yourself, you're just changing the notes by playing around on the fretboard. That's freaky enough, but it's also connected to your computer and synthesizer, so you can sync the speed of the circle, the rhythm it's playing, to the piece you're working on. You can change the sounds of the different strings. There's just never been anything like it, and you have to see it for yourself. There's a link in the notes. Click on the videos link once you get there to see it in action. It's just mind-boggling. It's also very exclusive at this point. The guy says he's only going to make like 8 of them to start, and they're going to cost about $15,000 each. So not for me. I'm guessing not for you either, but still super fascinating. Definitely worth checking out if you're at all interested. All right, that's highly recommended and our show for this week. Reminder, we are offering Raise Your Inner Game Executive Coaching now. davidlevin.com for more on that. Raise Your Inner Game, the material, the book, it was never only about sports, and we all need to boost our mental game for the coming times, as we have discussed. So check that out. And of course, if you are an athlete, or you know, and especially if you are the parent of an athlete, check out our Sports Academy training. You get all the benefits for the sports performance, plus the benefits for the rest of your life as sort of a bonus. RaiseYourInnerGame.com for that. All right, I hope you have a great week. Let me know any questions. Otherwise, keep up the good work. I'll see you next week.